So I went to McDonald's, but I didn't go to McDonald's restaurant. I went to the corporation. And at this time, the CEO of McDonald's was a guy who was looking to create new businesses. And he said, you know what, I don't know how much longer this burgers and fries thing is going to go because the growth is slowing. I want to try something different, and I want to start investing in a whole bunch of other kinds of concepts. So he invested at the time in some things that you know. He bought Boston Market, he bought Chipotle, and a handful of other places like that. But he asked me to come aboard and help him create new businesses. So we started looking around, and the question you might ask yourself, well, here I have this huge company, billions and billions of dollars, and it's worldwide, with tons and tons of people that go there every day. If you want to create a new company at McDonald's, what do you do? So we just started looking at things that look a little bit like fast food. And one of the things that we came across was vending machines. I don't know what's in those. Those are school supplies. But mostly, we didn't look at that kind of vending machine. But we looked at vending machines. Why? Why were vending machines interesting to McDonald's? It's sort of because if you look at burgers from 1950, which is when McDonald's got going, it looked a lot like vending machines did 10 years ago, which is there weren't any brands on them. There weren't these huge brands like Wendy's and McDonald's and Burger King. There were all lots of mom and pops spread out over the country, and they all had different experiences, and some of them were good quality, some of them were bad. And it's a lot like vending machines were 10 years ago, which is there's not a lot of innovation, and sometimes they break. And if you go to a vending convention, which I actually went to a couple, which was, I don't recommend, it's really, really boring. The people get really excited there because what their big innovation is now they can accept the dollar bill as opposed to quarters. And we said, you know what, this is an opportunity. Maybe we can create something much, much better with vending machines than exists today, because today, what happens with vending machines is people get Doritos and Diet Coke and Snickers bars, and we should be able to do so much more. Because at this time, you had touch screens coming about and people using credit cards for the first time over the internet, and lots of technology that meant we should be able to buy a lot more things out of a machine than we did. And the only really great example of a machine that had taken off at that point was ATMs. And we looked at ATMs, and what we learned was this, which was really interesting, which was that ATMs were started by big banks because they wanted to save money on tellers from behind the counter. It was much, much cheaper. And consumers at first hated ATMs. For many, many years, they barely did anything. And at a certain point, once consumers started using them, they never went back. And when we asked why, what the consumers told us is that they didn't want to deal with another human being. They really liked dealing with a machine in place of another human being. We said, well, that's pretty interesting. Can we find other machines to do other kinds of things that replace a human being with that machine? So we started looking all over the world at different concepts. So let me give you some examples. One of the first things, so, by the way, Redbox at the beginning was never about DVD rentals. It was about what we called automated retail, which to us sounded way cooler than vending. So we just created that term, automated retail. So we went around the world and we looked at interesting vending concepts. And so one of the first ones we saw was something called an automated convenience store, which is sort of like what it sounds. It was probably from here all the way over here, about 15 feet wide, 300 different items. It's like the biggest vending machine that you've ever seen. Everything was automated, didn't matter what the size of the package was, we could pull it out. And it was so big we had to put it outdoors. And we experimented with a bunch of these. So that was one of the first things we tried. And then we tried French fry vending machines. It's McDonald's, why not? So we tried out a bunch of those where it actually cooked the French fries after you put your money in and then spit them out. We tried, by the way, let me come back to the automated convenience store for a moment. So what was in there was a lot of convenience store things that you typically would see. We'd see sandwiches, we did have soft drinks, we had paper towels. Now here's an interesting thing by the way. The automated convenience store was all refrigerated. We couldn't figure out a way to make some part of it refrigerated and some part not. And one of the first things that we learned was that toilet paper refrigerated doesn't sell very well. Because you can figure that one out. The next thing that we learned, I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying this, it's a high school, but I'm saying it anyway, is that refrigerated condoms also don't sell very well. So we had to eliminate all the things that people generally don't like them to be really cold. So, but we did those things. We ended up creating 4 of those automated convenience stores, and they started to take off. French fry machine. The third thing that we tried out was a VHS rental machine that we had found in Israel, of all places. And we imported this machine, and if you guys remember VHS, obviously much, much bigger than DVDs. And by the way, right around this time, this was 2002, DVDs were just starting to take off. So we asked the manufacturer of this machine, would you mind retrofitting it from VHS to DVDs? And he said, sure, I'll try that out. And we imported a machine, and literally on the GUI was Hebrew. And we said, how is that going to really help us here in the United States with Hebrew? So they sort of retrofitted it a bit more. There was some English and some Hebrew. And we put a bunch of these really crappy machines out on street corners in Washington, D.C., in Bethesda. And despite the fact that the machine always broke down, despite the fact that it was half Hebrew, actually consumers kind of liked it. And we kept on getting people coming back. And we said, maybe we're onto something here. So we started experimenting with this thing, and it didn't have a name at this point. Redbox came a year or 2 later. So we just made up a crappy name and stuck it on there. And we started putting it at different locations. Supermarkets, McDonald's. We put it at apartment buildings, which didn't work very well. College campuses didn't work very well. But we got more and more good sort of resonance from consumers. We then kept on experimenting with what's the right price point. So you guys know for many years that the price point Redbox was $1 a day. How did we get to that? Originally, we had like a Blockbuster Video kind of price point, which was $3, $4 for maybe 3 days. And it worked okay, but we wanted to get consumers really to start coming in a big way. So what we did was, we said, let's try this promotional price point. It's going to be $1 a day. We'll never ever make any money at this, but it's just going to drive in a lot of consumers. And then once we have them, we'll figure out a way to drive up the price. Well, that turned out to be a promotional price point that we intended for like 3 months, and it lasted 8 years. And what we discovered was that we actually could make money at $1. We had no idea that we could, but because the consumers came in so much and so fast, we turned over the DVDs so much that we actually could make money. So that was another way that we experimented. We experimented on the selection. So early on, we had like 1,000 different titles, which was way too much. And then we went down to like 20 titles, which was way too little. And then we eventually settled on about 50 to 100 titles, which is sort of all the new releases over the last 6 months. And that turned out to be the right kind of amount. Now, in the midst of all of this, the McDonald's CEO is fired because the McDonald's stock price is plummeting, and McDonald's goes down this path of selling off things like Chipotle, which was a really big mistake, by the way, when you look back, but they did it, and Boston Market. And the second day of the CEO's tenure, his name is Jim Cantalupo, he comes in, I think his first day was like January 2nd. On January 3rd, he just cuts Redbox. This is 2004. He said, just forget it, get rid of it. So I go in to visit with him, and I say, and this is sort of story number 1 on our near-death experiences, and there's a couple other near-death experiences coming. And I said, Jim, why did you cut Redbox? So, and he's I liked him, and he was a very blunt guy, and watch my language, but he pulls down his glasses and he goes, Greg, I don't give an F about DVDs. I want to sell more burgers and fries. And I said, gotcha. I said, I think we could use Redbox to sell more burgers and fries. And he goes, really? Now, by the way, I was totally making this up. I had no idea if this was right. But, you know, your whole project, the last 2 years of my life is being cut. So I figured I may as well lie like crazy and then figure out if I could support that later on. So he said, really? How are you going to do that? And I said, well, we've put out Redboxes at a handful of McDonald's. And when we put them out, we have seen on a couple of occasions that customers are coming to the Redbox to rent the DVD, and then they're going to McDonald's to buy some more food. And he goes, that's what I like to hear. He said, that's what matters to me. And I said, well, what if we really promote this? You know, dollar menu, dollar DVDs, we put it all together, and we really try and drive McDonald's sales. He said, how much will that cost? So I go, 10 million? And he says, all right, you got your 10 million, get off and running, and you're back on, you're not cut. So I said, okay, great. So then I go back to the team, and we had maybe about 15 employees at this point. And I said, you want the good news or the bad news? He said, the good news is we're still around. The bad news is that we have to do everything we can to drive McDonald's sales because that's all that Jim Cantalupo cares about. So we, in 2004 now, we have our first full McDonald's market, and it's every McDonald's in the Denver market. So it's 106 McDonald's, and we're going to install a machine at every one of these locations. And the whole goal, again, is to drive more people to the McDonald's to sell more burger fries. So here's the problem, though, which is the machine I was telling you about from Israel, that one never worked. So we had to get rid of that one. And then we found another company that would make a machine for us. And they were in Silicon Valley. And we said to these guys, well, the machine that you've already made, is that we like the software, we like the machine, except it only has a capacity for 100 DVDs. And we rent that many in like a day. We need a much, much bigger capacity. And they said, no problem. We'll have a bigger machine for you by the time that you launch in Denver, which is around May. And we say, okay, great. Well, as we're getting closer, they're nowhere close to having this machine ready. So we sort of, again, gather the team together and we say, what are we going to do? So what we did is basically we put these 100 capacity machines side by side at every McDonald's. So it was 200 capacity, it still wasn't enough. And then we pretty much overhired all of our employees. So we're pretty much babysitting these machines. And when I say to you that we almost would have been better off hiring a midget to be inside every Redbox and hand out DVDs as people came up, rather than actually have a machine inside of it, we would have been better off because that's almost what we were doing. And so you might say that's not really a great way to build a business. We totally agree, but if you're an entrepreneur, and I'll talk more about this, if you ever have an interest in entrepreneurship, sometimes what you do is just to survive to see the next day. And at that point, this was another near-death experience, which is we need much bigger machines, but we don't have them, so we're just going to make it up on the fly. Turns out, in Denver, we kick ass. And these machines are renting like crazy, and even though we don't have the right operational system and the machines aren't working so well, we rent tons and tons of DVDs. And here's the most important part. We drive up McDonald's sales, and we get the approval from McDonald's to roll out to 1,000 more locations around the country. And that gives us a whole bunch of inertia going forward. So we go from one near-death experiences based upon first getting cut and then getting these two small machines to our next one. So our next one, we're now into 2005. And now McDonald's says to us, you can roll out to these 6 markets starting with Minneapolis. And now they're putting a lot of advertising behind it. And when McDonald's says they're going to put advertising behind it, they're literally spending millions of dollars on your behalf. And we're a tiny little company, Redbox. We've never spent any money on advertising. And McDonald's says we're going to spend millions of dollars on it. You just have to have your machines in by, and I'm making up this date, but let's say it was June 1st or something like that. So we scrapped that old company that was making the 2 small machines because they never delivered. This machine that they were supposed to have, the 500 capacity, they never get there, and we're always left sort of waiting for them. We move on to another company. And by the way, so we end up searching around the world to find the best machine for renting DVDs. And we go to Japan, we go to Europe, and where do we find this company is in Schaumburg, Illinois, which is just strangely ironic because we were all over the place. We find this company, now they have a too big capacity machine, right? So this is like Goldilocks, right? The first one's too small, this one's too big. And we say to those guys, we need to have a smaller, cheaper machine, again, by June 1st. They say, no problem. And by the way, in business, this is my first lesson for you. When anybody ever says no problem to you, that means that you're totally screwed. So they say no problem. So the advertising is coming, and it's getting close to June 1st, and we go and we look at the machine that's being manufactured in North Carolina. And it's not working. And when I say it's not working, meaning you put in your credit card and you select your movie, and it basically says, thanks for coming, but your movie doesn't come out. And I figured, with my background in business, I figured that probably wasn't going to work. That you probably needed to get your DVD out for this thing to work. So they say, what should we do? And I said, well, if we don't roll these machines out, we're going to be in really, really big trouble. So let's roll them out and see if we can make it work. So we roll out, I think it was about 150 to Minneapolis. Again, it's every McDonald's in Minneapolis. And within about 2 days, I am getting calls from all the McDonald's franchisees, the folks that own the restaurants there, saying our customers are livid, absolutely livid, because they're doing what I just described to you, which is they're renting DVDs, and like 1 out of 3 times they're just not getting it out. but they're getting charged for it, by the way. And then worse is they are coming back to return them. And you know, if anybody's used a Redbox, you sort of feel like this robotic arm take your DVD in, and you hear some whirring, stuff like that. That's not happening. The door is opening up, they're putting it in, and it's going clunk right on the bottom. And they're thinking that that's probably not something that should be happening, which is true. So the McDonald's franchisees say, we're going to pull all of your advertising unless you make these machines work. And again, we're sort of where we were about a year ago, which is we all go out to the field and we're babysitting these machines and fixing them all day long. And somehow we got through it. And from that point forward, it ended up being a really, really great run, with one exception that I'll tell you about. And so when I say great run, what I mean, we ended up, from that point forward, installing about 44,000 machines over the next 7 or 8 years. At one point, we were installing one machine every hour, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It was just so if you do the math, it's around 8,000 machines a year. And we just did this massive rollout to the entire United States. And we covered a lot of McDonald's, but we also went to Walmart and Walgreens, and here in town, Jewel and Dominick's, but we also went to Kroger and Safeway and 7-Eleven, and just pretty much everywhere that consumers go on a daily basis, we were in front of them. And over that time, we went from 0 to $1 billion in revenue in 7 years, which at that time was amongst the fastest any company's ever done. And the irony of all of this is that all of our competitors, Netflix, Blockbuster, if you guys remember Hollywood Video, I would meet with all their CEOs, and pretty much all of them would say, there's not a chance that you'll ever make money, we're going to try and put you out of business. Yet, we were rolling out and we were making money, but when they said that to me, I said, yeah, you're right, we're having a hard time, because you never let them know that things are going really well. It's sort of like when you're in the locker room, you don't try and tempt the other side. So I said, yeah, we're having lots of problems, but meanwhile, we're rolling out 8,000 machines a year.